sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey, Mike. Dad, how's it going?
Hey, good. Ethan, my son, how are you doing?
I'm well. I got a question for you, though. What is your most embarrassing moment of your life?
You know, you're taking advantage of the fact that we do not practice these podcasts, and I'm not going to fall for your evil little scheme. So good try. I'll just share with you that not the most embarrassing moment of my life, but I will tell you that I was on a stage in front of maybe 50 workshop participants, and it was a stage kind of thing, which is unusual for us. As you know, I'm usually, small groups and we're kind of mingling around, but I'm up on stage and a guy literally in the middle of my workshop came up to the stage, went around to the side, went up the stairs, walked over to me to tell me that my fly was down in front of everybody, basically. And he said later that he had been just suffering for 20 minutes, trying to figure out how to let me know this. So that was probably in the top.
Wow.
20. That's in the top 20. Yeah.
So he didn't whisper in your ear. He just came up and announced it in front of everybody.
No. He whispered it to me, but the fact was he had to go up on the stage to whisper it to me. So he might as well have just yelled it, right? It was really, really one of the most awkward moments of my life.
Yeah. Well, it's not that it was a surprise to anybody that your fly was down. I'm sure everybody had realized it by that point.
Everybody was pretty awkward. Yeah, and it's weird that I just told you I wasn't going to fall for your scheme, and then I fell for your scheme, didn't I?
Yeah.
Wow, you have a superpower. How about you, dude?
That's nothing compared to my most embarrassing moments. But I'm not going to go there.
Oh no!
I'm gonna have self-control.
No way.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Dude, not only does it have nothing to do with our podcast topic, maybe it does. I think you've just created some conflict here, dude. That was so unfair.
Super unfair. But anyways, enough of the chit chat. Welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. Our dear listeners out there, as you know, I'm Ethan, one of your co-hosts, and with me today, as usual, or at least mostly usual, is Mr. Mike Nash. And we're excited for another episode. We're continuing our journey today on conflict and really how to develop skills, behaviors, mindsets to engage in conflict in a healthy way, or what we might reframe as productive disagreement or healthy disagreement. But I think we know what we're talking about when we say disagreement or conflict. We're talking about when there is a differences of opinions or ideas. Or I think, we should go with one decision and you think we should go with the other. I mean, there's a variety of different disagreements and conflicts that come up in the workplace and life. And we've been exploring this topic the last few episodes.
Yeah. And I want to point out again that this is so important because I think, Ethan, you and I have even spent time talking about, should we call it conflict? Should we call it disagreement? And the idea being that it's just such an uncomfortable concept. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because we've got to be able, as leaders, as humans, as members of communities, as members of families, we've got to be able to, I guess, accept the idea that disagreement is part of life, and it does not have to be this thing that we run from or that we fight or that we freak out about. It needs to be this thing that we're able to embrace. So I'm just, again, really glad that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, me too. Just for a little bit of review from the last couple episodes, and you touched on a few pieces that we discussed here, of course, but yes, disagreement and conflict doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing in our lives. It can actually be something that's healthy for relationships and can build relationships when done with tact and care and love and respect. But why, just in general, why is conflict something we don't really like as human beings, which is a little bit of a paradox because we tend to engage in it fairly often as a species. But why is it something that we just don't like on an individual level?
I think this gets pretty deep, but we could start a lot of different places, but I would start with just that we all have had it modeled to us one way or another. We've all seen conflict as we've seen it like weirdly avoided, or we've seen it turn into yelling and screaming and character assassination. We've seen it erupt in fighting or divorce. We've seen it handled really well. We all have a variety of experiences, but we were, quote, taught how to feel about conflict really early on. And because I guess humans aren't generally masters at it, many of us had probably some pretty unhealthy modeling. So what do you think? I'd start there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I would take it even a step further down and suggest that, look at when, as a species, we probably evolved to be pretty fearful when conflict or disagreement comes up, right? It puts us into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? It activates our amygdala because when conflict showed up, it means we were in danger, right? It means either we potentially could be being rejected from our group, from our tribe, or it could mean that we are about to, engage in something that could mean, I get removed from the gene pool. So we evolved to be fearful of it. And so when we get into conflict, again, we all will develop different approaches and reactions to it. But I think the baseline is it tends to bring up fear for people. And that's why it's a difficult skill to master, because how do we engage in something that tends to make us a bit fearful, even though we need to engage in that to be a part of building high performing teams and relationships.
Yeah. I mean, that's really well said. I think it's this weird dynamic where it's this thing, this disagreement, conflict, whatever you want to call it, that creates this feeling in our body, right? It creates this fear. And yet we believe that conflict and disagreement is a healthy part of relationships if done well, right? And so now we're actually asking ourselves to kind of face in and lean into this thing that doesn't feel really good, which we're not really good at as humans, right? So I think that's probably the bottom line.
Yeah. And one more question here, just in the line of reviewing a bit of the last few episodes. What are the benefits of, and let's just talk about work teams for now. What are the benefits of people that work together engaging in healthy disagreement? Like, what do we get from this? Why should we care about this as a team or organization?
I bet we could make a list here. Let's throw this back and forth. I'm going to start with, we think outside the box. We get creative. We're able to push through to some new ideas and potentially solve some cool problems in some cool ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a general good summary of why this is important. I mean, again, we could list probably a bunch of subcategories of that. But when we engage, like you said, I think when we can engage in it in a productive way, it allows us to come to better decisions because we're free to have a dialogue about it and free to express our differences. And we're freed up to listen to each other with respect and get curious. Right? And so we just come to better resolutions, come to better decisions. And I will say that another benefit of this is you can actually build stronger relationships through navigating conflict together, because it's hard, because it can be emotional, because it brings up fear responses, and because we're having to practice really good adaptive skills that we'll talk about, in a different episode here in relation to conflict. We grow together, right? Because we've navigated something difficult. And when you navigate something difficult together, you improve as a unit if done well, right? If you come out the other side. So I think that's another benefit here.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another one. I think he also, it's related to the other first two, but we are less likely to be treated unfairly, we're less likely to be disenfranchised or maybe have someone else be disenfranchised. I think this goes back to outcomes as far as, and relationship both, but it's this idea that I'm going to be more likely to get my needs met and you're going to be more likely to get your needs met if we're able to effectively engage in healthy conflict.
Good. Beautiful. Yes. So yeah, if you go back to the last couple episodes, episode 73, this was about kind of this topic here, why it matters, why healthy disagreement is important for building teams, why we need to embrace conflict. And then we got into understanding our conflict styles. And we walked through a few exercises to gain a bit of an understanding of where your default mode is in terms of how you engage in conflict. In the next episode, episode 74, which we called Consideration and Courage, this is where we talked about, again, the different conflict styles and how they tend to show up in disagreement. Right? We really broke down each style. And then we talked pretty in depth about what they call or the collaborator style and how that shows up and why it's the ideal place to be and what it looks like. With the punchline there being, of course, the person that's in the collaborator style, they are approaching conflict with both high consideration for the other person and high courage, the courage to speak their truth, and so on and so forth. So again, encourage you to go back to listen to those 2 episodes, because today we're going to continue talking about conflict styles, because we left you with a cliffhanger in that last episode, which was, now that we understand our conflict styles, what might be some of our growth opportunities for each conflict style in order to move closer to the collaborator style? Am I missing anything there?
No, other than I'm maybe stating the obvious. Really understanding your sort of default conflict style then allows you to choose the correct growth opportunity. And I say that because I know I've worked with a fair number of clients who may be misunderstanding for example, their own behavior style. They might think that, well, I'm somebody who kind of shies away from conflict, and so I need to learn to be more confrontive. They might believe that about themselves, but they're not accurate. And so here's this person who already comes on pretty strong, and they're thinking, well, I got to learn how to, be more confrontive. And so now they're really blowing it out of the water. They're really going too far. And I just want to say again, the obvious, that those last couple episodes where we get a chance to kind of figure out where we sort of stand in our default mode, then makes it more likely we're going to choose the right direction in our growth opportunities.
Yes. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. Really, really well said. We need to understand where we're starting from. So we're picking the right opportunities for us. Good.
And can I ask you again, Ethan? And I think I know, and it was just a few weeks ago, but if you had to choose your, first default, maybe your second default, what's your first and second, maybe conflict style in your default mode?
Well, I would say that my maybe primary style is the competitor, and we'll review that in just a moment here of the characteristics of that style. So I would say that's where where I go to if I'm at my rawest and I'm not practicing any specific growth opportunities or adaptive skills. I go to the competitor. And yeah, I'll just stick with my primary for now. How about yours? And I know we discussed this before on the other episodes, but
yeah, and it's funny. I hope I'm saying the same thing I said then, but this is where I'm at. I think my primary is competitor as well. I think we agreed that we were pretty similar in that way. I've actually been processing what might be my next place I go to, and I think it's avoider. I think I go competitor, and then if I'm not getting what I consider my needs met, I think I might go to avoider. So just kind of a little bit of a personal insight I've had recently.
That makes sense. I can actually see how that can make sense for a lot of competitors in a sense, right? I either am competing with you and I'm kind of looking at a win-lose situation. And if I don't get that, it's like I'm backing away and I actually don't want to be a part of this, right? That like it can almost.
Whatever you're going to do, don't involve me.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a summary of each conflict style here. And then let's talk about some growth opportunities that we have identified for these conflict styles. These, of course, are not going to be one size fit all, but when we look at these particular conflict styles, I would say these are what we might consider maybe the biggest bang for the buck in terms of new mindsets and skills to practice to help you move into the collaborator mode. So again, there's 4 conflict styles, setting aside the collaborator for now. But so besides that, there's 4 other styles. First one is the competitor. And a competitor is going to have a type of win-lose orientation towards conflict. I win this conflict and you're going to lose is the idea. So they're going to tend to be more assertive and less cooperative in conflict when they're at their rawest. They're going to tend to pursue their own goals and their own concerns at the expense of maintaining the relationship with the person they're in conflict with. They're going to be more interested in winning the conflict by, more boldly or clearly stating their position and then defending it. They're going to maybe anticipate and advance areas of disagreement and maybe start to prepare responses to those objections. Right? They might say during a conflict, just as an example, hey, I'm standing up for myself here. Right? So that's kind of the vibe of a competitor.
Yeah, and some of the behaviors, one of those, you might be a competitor, right? You're going to see more likely to talk over somebody else, to interrupt. You're going to see repeating their points over and over again, coming back to their same points again and again. You're going to see a lot of questions. If they're asking questions at all, they're almost prosecutorial, almost designed to disprove. You're going to see appeals to expertise, and this is what everybody thinks, and lots of those basically ploys to win.
Yep. So that's your competitor. So the next conflict style is our accommodator. Now, an accommodator is going to have more of a yield, lose, win orientation, meaning they're going to yield their kind of needs in this situation and instead maybe let the other person win the disagreement. So they're going to be less assertive and more cooperative in a sense. They're going to end up pursuing the maintenance of the relationship at the expense of their own goals or concerns. So you see the contrast between this one and the competitor, of course. They're going to be more interested in maybe displaying generosity and peacemaking and maybe yielding to the other person's point of view. They might be anticipating how the conversation may damage the relationship and then identify ways to maintain harmony, right? They might say, hey, you know what? You're probably right here. I'm wrong. And you know what? Let's go grab a beer now. So, that's a general description of the accommodator. And then Mike, what might be some of the behaviors that you would see during a conflict with an accommodator?
Yeah, you might be an accommodator, right? If you're kind of the opposite of the competitor, you're not interrupting, but you're actually very open to being interrupted. Like you're one of those people that when you pause and then someone else starts talking, you just stop. You leave a lot of open doors for people to jump in. You don't take the ball back when the ball gets taken from you, in a sense. I think possibly you'll do a lot more nodding, a lot of good listening, probably less involved in the verbiage, less words in the conversation. It's interesting because I think a lot of accommodators too, they can show up a bit passive aggressive. Or at least that's the way it might show up or it might appear. They're not going to say what they're really thinking. They're going to kind of nod and smile, but later on, possibly find out that they weren't really on board. And that can be a relationship issue.
So next up is our compromiser. And their approach to conflict is a lot like what it sounds like. They're seeking a compromise, which on its face sounds pretty positive. And in many cases, it can be, right? But the compromiser is maybe looking for, hey, let me get a small win in this situation. And then I'll also take a small loss. And then you get a small win and maybe you take a small loss, right? So there's a bit of a win, I get some and I lose some, and you get some and you lose some. So they're going to be more, you know, mildly assertive and mildly cooperative, right? As opposed to the other two styles, right? The competitor being more assertive and less cooperative, and the accommodator being less assertive and more cooperative. They are kind of mild with both of those. So they're going to pursue more of an, at times more of an expedient solution that might only partially satisfy both parties. They could be interested in incorporating a combination of both opinions without really upsetting one another. As they're preparing for a conflict, they might start anticipating in advance areas of possible compromise. Their slogan might be, hey, let's split the difference here. So that's a compromiser. And Mike, back to you. So behaviors of the compromiser.
Yeah, there's two that occur to me that I've seen quite often. Number one, I think they're the most kind of vocally opposed to conflict, which might seem weird, right? You'd think that the accommodator is the most opposed to conflict, but the accommodator just like stops engaging and they kind of agree, right? The compromiser is going to be like, oh, I'm sensing conflict. Let's make sure that stops. Let's quickly find an agreement. Let's shy away from really hashing this out. So you're going to see the compromiser, I think, more actively avoiding running away from conflict, but saying it verbally, like, let's not go there. Let's just come up with this other answer so we don't have to go there kind of feel. And then the other thing is, I think he did say it, it's like an expediency. It's almost like, let's not stay engaged very long. It's uncomfortable. Let's hurry this up, right? Here's a quick solution that sort of satisfies or maybe equally dissatisfies both of us kind of thing.
And again, it kind of sounds positive, right? Let's compromise. Right? We often use that phrase when talking about managing conflict. Let's find a compromise here.
One thing to keep in mind too is that not all conflict styles are created equal, in the sense that, in general, we tend to say that the competitor and the accommodator and the avoider, that we kind of want to get away from those three and move toward collaboration. It's the compromisers, like you said, a little different. There is a time and a place for that. And sometimes that is kind of the only place you're going to be able to go. Sometimes collaboration is not going to be possible. So as almost like a second best, I'll take the compromise.
Yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I actually think you can apply that phrase, there's a time and a place for this, to all the styles. There's actually a time and the place where you are probably best off just avoiding this conflict, right? I can think of those situations. Or there's a time and a place where, hey, maybe accommodating is best. Or, hey, maybe this is a time and place I need to go into competitor mode, right? I'm not saying those are, the best ones to go to, but there might be a time and a place. I think with a compromiser, I consider them a little bit equal on that, because in this case, you're still kind of walking away without considering more creative solutions, right? We're still saying, hey, let me just give, and then you give, and I win, and you win. But I don't see that as necessarily better than the other styles, because we're kind of still watering down our resolution here in a sense. I think it's just different. And it just sounds a little bit less negative. I mean, that's just kind of my take on that. I don't think we could rank order them.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And maybe we'll just disagree on this one a little bit, which is fine, right? And part of that, I know when we're teaching this, we tend to say there's this line between compromise and collaboration, and sometimes you're going to fall somewhere along that line. And, this is a dumb analogy exactly, but, I want to do this 4 times and you want to do this 6 times and we decide on 5 times. Sometimes the nature of the decision itself kind of really leans toward a compromise as opposed to something very collaborative. So it might be a little bit dependent on what it is that we're disagreeing about.
I think you're right. I think it's going to be situational. So the next conflict style is the avoider. Not that I'm avoiding this last disagreement, but let's move on to the avoider. The avoider is more of I'm going to leave and I'm going to lose and you get a win. So the avoider is someone that's going to be both unassertive in conflict and uncooperative. They're going to be both. So they're going to pursue neither their own goals or concerns, nor the goals or concerns of the other person, at the expense of their goals and the relationship. So what I mean by that is with the avoider approach, you're kind of taking a hit to your goals and you're taking a hit to the relationship with the person you're in conflict with. So they're going to be more interested in kind of leaving just the issues unaddressed by maybe skillfully sidestepping the conflict or postponing and just keep postponing or just withdrawing completely. Like, I just can't do this type of attitude. But what are some of the behaviors you might see from an avoider in a conflict? And maybe just the premise of that question itself is off because maybe they wouldn't be in conflict. So I don't know what behaviors you would see, but let me bounce that back to you.
Well, that's a good point. I think you listed some of them really well, but I would say avoiding the conversation, either by just being distracted and bringing in lots of other things so you don't actually have to face the conversation, maybe literally just kind of shutting down in the conversation, just not participating and putting your head down and crossing your arms and sort of trying to disappear. I've got a buddy, I would say a bit of an avoider, and his style is to just constantly say something funny, constantly saying something humorous to avoid anything that might be a little bit uncomfortable. So just any kind of behavior that keeps us from actually having to have the conversation.
Yep. Of course, remember with this, folks, like this is only a model. Right. So it's not meant to represent like a rigid version of reality for yourself. Few people are just always in one of these categories and not the others. Most of us are somewhat flexible with these depending on the situation. But the theory here is you kind of have a home base with this when you're at your rawest. Right. So we're painting with broad strokes here, of course. Right. It's a tool for exploring just your different tendencies and attitudes toward conflict. So always got to give that caveat there for the skeptical listeners out there.
Yeah, don't put me in a box. Don't put me in a box.
Nobody's being put in a box today, folks. Nobody's being put in a box. And so this brings us then to the fifth conflict style, which is collaboration mode. And as we nodded to earlier, this is really where we're trying to get to when we're in conflict. Like, this is the style that if we can flex this style, it's going to lead to stronger relationships, better results, all those good things that we outlined at the beginning of this episode. So real briefly here, the collaborator, this is the person that has that win-win orientation. Right? What if we can find a solution, a creative solution here in which I have my needs and goals fulfilled and you have your needs and goals fulfilled, and neither of us have to feel like we're taking a loss here. It's aspirational in a sense, but that is their mindset going in. So they're going to be both assertive and cooperative. Right? Remember what I said earlier, high consideration for the other person and high courage. So they're the folks that are going to maybe pursue an alternative, creative solution that's going to fully satisfy both parties. People that might say, hey, what are we missing here? Right? Or we have option A and we have option B. What if there's an option C here? So they're going to be interested in exploring areas of disagreement and learning from each other through that disagreement. Right? They're going to anticipate in advance potential shared concerns and shared goals, and then maybe prepare some questions to explore those areas. So that's the collaborator. High consideration, high courage, pursuing the win-win. Now back to you, Mr. Nash. What else can you say about the collaborator mode? Maybe some behaviors or some other insights you have about that one.
I think I'm gonna pull a fast one on you and say, instead of some behaviors, it's almost a segue into where we're going next, right? Because what we're about to talk about are couple of growth opportunities, right, for each of those other styles. And I would say that every one of the growth opportunities we're about to suggest would be exactly what we're talking about. These would be the behaviors of a collaborator, but what we're going to do now is we're going to apply them to each separate style. What would be the big bang for the buck, right? Which collaboration behavior would be best for the competitor to practice, kind of thing. So why don't we just kind of roll into some growth opportunities, and those are the behaviors right there.
Okay. I like it. Good deal. let's go back to the top then. Let's talk about our competitor. What are some growth opportunities for the competitor so they can lean more towards that collaboration mode? Remember, the competitor, of course, has I win, you lose orientation. So as a competitor myself, the first growth opportunity I personally work on and that I recommend to other people with this style is practice curiosity. Practice curiosity. There's this quote by a psychotherapist from Argentina, Salvador Minuchin, I believe his name is. And I just love this quote, which is, certainty is the enemy of change. And I think that's a good thing for competitors to remember, because that allows them to access some more curiosity going into a situation by thinking, I might not know what I don't know in this situation. So practice curiosity, meaning just work on engaging in a genuine explanation or exploration of the other person's perspectives, right? Maybe think of it as, hey, what if I am more of a, in a debate here, but I am maybe more trying to act as a scientist here. Like, I want to truly figure out what's going on with this other person. Why do they hold the opinions they have? Why do they have the ideas they have? Why do they actually disagree with me? Like, really getting down into the why behind things. So this is going to be practicing, the art of asking good questions, and maybe starting with a lot of questions to explore before advocating for your own point of view. One of the things competitors will do is they go into advocating for their position, their point of view, before they're asking questions to understand. So seek to understand, and then when it's your turn, seek to be understood. So practice curiosity.
And that one there is, dude, is so important, because one of the reasons that we skip the step you're talking about is because, frankly, competitors also tend to be relatively impatient people. We just tend to be impatient. And what
How dare you?
what you've described right there takes incredible patience, because it slows things down, and you're not, jumping right to the chase and sharing your point of view and trying to get what you want. You really are building in more time to really understand. And that time you build in allows so much more space for the other person to feel heard, which warms them up to you and helps the whole conversation go better. So I just want to remind our listeners, and I'm reminding myself, that the things we need to do as competitors to kind of balance our style out require us to have a little bit more patience.
Beautiful.
Growth opportunity, which would be kind of dovetails really from the one you just mentioned, which is practicing curiosity, which is in the process of being curious, look for the wins. And I don't mean your win. That's what we tend to do, right? Look for the areas where we're already on the same page. And it's so encouraging to the other person when you can say something like, dude, that's what I think. Like, oh, I totally agree with that. Or here's a place where we're on the same page. Or, hey, you know what? Looks like we're already halfway there because we both think X, Y, and, finding those things and kind of putting a flag in those things. I just think it builds bridges. It makes you feel like you're making progress. And again, it helps the other person to reciprocate, and be open to hearing your point of view as well. So,
yeah, good. And of course, folks, remember, because the goal here is we're trying to move towards the collaboration mode, which is finding that win-win. And guess what? It's basically impossible to find the win-win if you don't explore areas where you see eye to eye. Yeah, you have to go there. Yeah, seek the win-win. Look for where you can agree with each other. And I think that's just a really good motto to have. Like, what if we start there? What if we start with where we're aligned? And to echo a point you said earlier, guess what? That's not necessarily... It doesn't necessarily feel efficient. It requires more time, but I think it'll save you time in the long run, because you're going to have less dealing with repairing the relationship that you might have damaged by not seeking where we agree first, if that makes sense.
There's been so many times in my life where I feel that I've saved time in retrospect now, I feel like I saved time by kind of pushing my way, getting what I wanted. The other person either was quiet, they gave in, whatever. But you're absolutely right. There's a cost to that. And that cost, relationally or, productivity or whatever it happens to be, that cost is going to be a time suck no matter what. So good point.
Indeed. So there you go, folks, for the competitor. A couple suggestions there, right? Practice curiosity, come in with that mindset. And number 2, look for areas of agreement. Right? Anticipate areas of agreement in advance. And that's a really good starting point for that conversation. Let's talk about the accommodator. Mike, what would be a growth opportunity for the accommodator, right? Somebody that is kind of willing to yield and take the loss here, which means their partner in conflict gets the win. And hey, I maintained the relationship. I may have, maintained the relationship at the expense of my own goals and concerns, but I maintained the relationship. So I'm happy. But what are some growth opportunities so they can more embrace conflict and get into collaborator mode?
Yeah, this might be me being biased here. I just want to say that I'm accommodator is not my primary style, but I just think that what we're asking accommodators to do is just really difficult. It might even be harder than what we just asked the competitors to do. Because I guess the first thing I want to ask an accommodator to consider is just really practicing that skill of showing up with what you want or what you need or what you think. Just being willing to make space for yourself, right? To tell yourself maybe that you deserve to be heard, that you have a valid opinion, that you really do get to take up space here, and being willing to lean in with the fact that you disagree or that you think this other thing. I guess it's just practicing the art of being clear about what you want, what you think. Not saying it's easy, but I think that's a worthy journey for the accommodators.
Yeah. Good. That's the courage side of our consideration and courage equation, right? Stating your own needs, stating your own perspectives. And that does take courage for many of us. Right. Another growth opportunity for the accommodator is what I might just sum up by the phrase, claim your space, which again, this is coming back to courage. With the competitor, it's more leaning towards the consideration side. With the accommodator, it's leaning more towards the courage side. So claim your space, like meaning, hey, we're there in that disagreement with each other. We're exploring each other's perspectives. Now, you got to make sure there's room for you to advocate for your position, right? Especially if you're in a disagreement with a competitor. It's, hey, I believe I understand your perspective. I think I got it. If I'm hearing you correctly, here's where you're at. And now I'd like to share where I'm coming from. Right? So I'm claiming my space because it might not be given to you necessarily, depending on who you're speaking with. So it's stating firmly, hey, it's my turn now. I'm gonna share my opinion. And that doesn't have to be mean, doesn't have to be harsh. You don't have to be a jerk about it. It can actually be soft and kind, but firm at the same time. Claiming your space.
That is so important because I just think, man, you can be talking to a competitor and one of their maybe ways of winning is to make bold statements and then move on, right? Like I've made my statement and that's the last word and now we're going forward. And it's this getting your foot in the door as an accommodator to say, well, yeah, like you said, I hear you. That makes sense. I want a chance now to share what I think. So I just want to emphasize that's such an important skill for accommodators.
Yeah. And it could even be, if you are speaking up about your perspective and you're getting interrupted a lot, to take a step back and saying, hey, can we restart here in this conversation? I would like the opportunity to just share my opinion without any interruptions, right? Is that okay with you? So it's those little things throughout the conversation to make sure you're getting your airtime as well. Let's talk about the compromiser. The compromiser, our dear compromisers. Remember, they're the folks that are pursuing hey, I'll take a small win and I'll take a small loss here, which means you get a small win, but you also have to take a small loss. So they're mildly assertive, mildly cooperative. Now, with the compromiser, and this is something, again, that you talked about earlier with the compromiser, is They might be looking for more of an expedient solution sometimes. So the growth opportunity here is practice patience, right? Like practice getting comfortable with not solving problems immediately. It's a mindset, right? Like, hey, is it necessary that this disagreement gets resolved like in the next 10 minutes or hour or even today, right? Getting comfortable with that, like being willing to hang in there and allow for just ongoing dialogue, which means you're gonna have to take the time to fully explore each other's perspectives and needs. Because if you don't take the time to fully explore that, you're not going to get to the creative solutions that come with the collaborator mode. So practice patience, hang in there, and just remember that conflict is going to be a natural part of the process to get to where you're trying to get to. So stay engaged.
Especially, I think you said this, but especially as it gets uncomfortable, as you feel uncomfortable because it's conflict, that's when you're going to want to run away and, come up with a quick compromise, right? So as you get more uncomfortable, that's the time to tell yourself, all right, just be patient. We're not there yet. I would add a mindset, which is really, again, sort of describing the bottom line for compromisers. It's just, instead of going in with what are we both going to have to give up here, go in with more of a win-win expectation, right? Just kind of go in there with the idea that, you know what, I am pretty sure there's a creative out of the box solution here. Going in with that expectation, even if that doesn't turn out to be the case, start with that as opposed to we're both going to have to lose something here.
I love that. Yeah, again, just a mindset of, hey, what if I approach this not in terms of, okay, what are we both going to have to lose here to get to the end of this, to get this over with maybe, but how can we both win, right? And sometimes you get there, sometimes you don't, but you have to start with that mindset. And that leads us to our avoider, the avoider, our lovely avoiders.
I'd actually rather not talk about this one.
Yeah, we should just avoid it. So the avoider, again, it's kind of I'll take a loss and I'm just going to avoid and you get a win. I just don't want to have anything to do with this. First piece of advice here, this might be obvious, but it's kind of what I would say, just embrace your courageous self. And maybe this sounds a little bit touchy-feely or something like that, but I really do believe deep down we have this kind of courageous self that's a part of all of us that we can kind of tap into if we're willing to explore that and put ourselves in maybe vulnerable situations, uncomfortable situations. And that's what we're asking the avoider to do here, is embrace that courage that you have in you, which is like reminding yourself that, hey, yeah, conflict at times, it doesn't feel good. It feels scary. You might be in your fight, flight, and freeze part of your brain when it's happening, but it's being willing to take some deep breaths and then face the conflict and recognizing that by doing that, it's better for you and the person that you're in a disagreement with, right? So the courageous self is recognizing that doing this scary thing, the results and maybe the negative things that might come from engaging in this conflict is better than not doing it at all in the long run, right? Remembering that conflict and disagreement is actually necessary in a sense to have strong relationships with people. We have to be able to navigate that through that conflict together. So that is about embracing your courageous self as the avoider.
That was really well said. And at the risk of a little rabbit trail, I just got to say this: what you just described and what some of the other growth opportunities we've talked about here, this podcast, these are really kind of lifelong growth opportunities, right? These are difficult. I mean, we're talking about embracing your courage. We're talking about kind of changing the way, you're facing into fear in some cases, holding back, being more patient, depending on where we're coming from. These are really, really hard stuff. And I just want to remind our listeners and ourselves that these are growth opportunities that are about, in some cases, really about healing. They're about recognizing where these fears came from, how conflict was modeled. It's not like you're going to walk into a conversation and say, suddenly I have courage, or suddenly I'm going to be patient. There's kind of a deeper level of work that we get to do, that we have the privilege of doing as we become more of a collaborator. I just want to remind us that these growth opportunities are kind of they're really a process.
Yeah, that's really well said. And that also reminds me of just, the only way to kind of build self-confidence and practice these healthy disagreement skills is to be willing to engage in them, which again is what we're coming back to with the avoider. Being willing to engage in it so you can practice some of this stuff, so you can gain self-confidence in it. So another opportunity for the avoider here is just remembering, and this is just a tool for them to have in their back pocket, which I think can help them feel a bit more safe when they're getting into a disagreement with somebody. And the tool is remembering that it's okay to bookmark that conversation. Meaning, if you're not really ready to fully state your opinion and engage in some heated conversation because you haven't had time to process, it's okay to say something like, hey, you know what? I would like to think about this, and then can we engage in this conversation tomorrow or next week? And this is totally fine. What it does is it buys you time to kind of get into the right mindset and prepare yourself to be courageous and stay engaged. So basically, this is a nod towards saying, look, if you find yourself in a conflict and you're not prepared and you're not on the right mindset, step back for a moment, regroup, and then come back when you're ready. And that can go a long ways towards, I think, building some self-confidence around conflict. So I don't know, have you ever used that tactic before?
I don't know if I have, but I really like it. And I think there's some courage there as well. Even just to say, I don't totally know what I think yet. I haven't processed this yet. Can we not wrap this up today? Can we come back to this tomorrow, or at our meeting next week? That it's just another way to make space for yourself. I just think that takes some courage, and I encourage our avoiders and whoever else needs to do that, right, to make that space.
Good. So again, folks, just some suggestions for growth opportunities for you to consider. And again, the point here is we're all moving towards the collaboration mode by practicing some of these adjustments. And collaboration mode is where the magic happens when it comes to being in disagreement with people. And so just in summary, the growth opportunities that we discussed today was practice curiosity, anticipate and look for areas of agreement, right? So thinking about what could the win-win be here in advance. It's clearly stating your own needs and perspectives, and it's claiming your space. And again, you can see how if I was a competitor, claiming my space and clearly stating my own needs and perspectives might not be the best advice for me. So you got to pick what makes sense for you. We talked about practicing patience, right? Getting comfortable with not solving problems immediately. We talked about anticipating in advance the win-win scenarios, which came up as another opportunity earlier. And for the avoider, we talked about embracing your courageous self, or being willing to bookmark a conversation to come back to. So again, we're probably, a combination of styles here. It's not as rigid as the sound. So you have to use your wisdom and self-judgment and decide, hey, what's the best opportunity for me right now to improve my style, to move to collaboration mode? So are we leaving anything out here? Can you think of any other opportunities here, or even ways that as our listeners are thinking about their growth opportunities and selecting them, that they can kind of keep these on their radar? So a couple questions there. Choose your own adventure.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say don't wait. Don't wait till you're in the conflict to start processing these growth opportunities. The place you're going to do, I think, the most of your growing is in processing these things ahead of time. Like thinking about how you feel around conflict, finding your courage, practicing patience in other parts of your life. These growth opportunities, I think conflict shows up at a time, when we're already activated, and it's not as easy for us to access these growth opportunities. So I just want to encourage our listeners to find some other ways and opportunities, whether that's in meditation, whether that's in other conversations, to practice these growth opportunities. So I encourage our listeners to find some other times in their lives, maybe in meditation, maybe in other conversations, to practice these growth opportunities so that when you get into that conflict situation, it's a little bit easier to access that skill.
Love that. One thing I would suggest as well is maybe just kind of a straightforward, practical way to keep this stuff on your radar is maybe choose 2 or 3 growth opportunities for yourself. And hey, if you're feeling up to it and you have, close people in your life that trust you, that you trust and you care about and respect, maybe get some data from them as well. Like, hey, how do I tend to show up in conflict? And maybe describe to them the collaborator style. Hey, what could I do to be more in the collaboration style when I'm in conflict? So get some data, think about these different suggestions we gave you. And again, pick 2 or 3 of them. And then maybe each week, have one of those growth opportunities somewhere visible for you throughout the day, right? A sticky note on your desk or on your mirror. And it's remembering, hey, when I get into disagreements or slight conflicts this week, this is the thing I'm going to be focused on. Like this week, I'm focused on embracing my courageous self, right? And then the next week, maybe move to your next one. And I think if you do that and kind of keep rotating those, they'll start to stick in because it's visible. And visibility is one of the most important tools for behavior change, is just keeping it on your radar. So real quick here before we end, our next episode, we're going to continue this journey on healthy conflict. And we're going to discuss conflict or disagreement as an adaptive skill, and then talk about some of the overall mindsets that all of us can adopt to get really good at healthy disagreements. So mindsets we can all practice kind of regardless of your conflict style. So we'll get into that next episode. And the last thing I want to leave you with is that, hey, remember, we have the Managing with Mind and Heart newsletter that comes out roughly on a monthly basis, no more than once a month, that's for sure. And we have a lot of fun putting these together. This is really where we're just trying to share practical, useful information, tools for leaders and managers to really kind of up their game and build teams based on trust and respect and build high performing teams. And so, we've covered everything from, of course, conflict and how to engage in that in a healthy manner. We've talked about feedback. We've talked about embracing self-compassion, running effective meetings, and the list of cool content goes on. So get on that newsletter. You can do so by texting the word leading to the number 66866. I hope you dig it, and I hope you dig this episode. We'll see you next time.